Welcome back, everyone, to Still Point Radio. This is part 2 of Creation Mechanics, Optic and Electric Universe, Russellian Science with Matt Presti and Darren Colomb. We're going to continue on and talk about math, mass, gravity, thank you, magnetic cones, the center of planets and stars, pressure conditions, and more. Here we go. Enjoy. So Darren, I wanted to ask you this question that constantly comes up for me, and I have a very difficult time answering it, honestly. People are constantly asking me this one question. Whenever I post a video on Russellian science, the work of Walter Russell, or anything in the physics paradigm that has to do with the electric universe model, someone inevitably chimes in and goes, well, where's the math? Show me the math. And it's as if they're programmed and trained that if you don't give them that little cookie or that biscuit of math, then it's unacceptable and it doesn't exist. So I wanted to just put that question to you. If someone says, I did a video out there that got a lot of hits. It was like, how do you weigh a floating planet? So this is going to be a two-question question. How do you actually weigh a floating planet? How do we actually get the weight of something that is floating in space, and we can't put it on a scale? So there's the second part of the question. And the first part of the question is, if you're going to talk about something like this in the Russellian science model, and someone says, okay, well, now you've told me how to weigh a floating planet, where's the language to prove it? Where's the math? How would you respond to that, Darren?
Well, yeah, this is a fundamental in science. We have to render everything down to mathematics, and if it doesn't render to mathematics, it can't possibly be true. And that's the way it goes. That's the way it's taught, and it's just a way of thinking. When it comes to Russell science, there's an entire chapter in the Universal One on universal mathematics. Maybe it's missed because it's not quite. It has to do with ratios. In other words, it's all geometric. Russell science is about geometry, not about putting every aspect of motion down into some kind of formula with constants, right? There's always constants in everything because there's no other way to get any kind of relationship other than by something which is a constant, which is another way of saying a fulcrum, right? So, for instance, just as an example, E equals mc squared, C would be the constant, and you have a relationship between mass and energy now, right? But it's a relationship which is made up because of the constant, something which is a set value and never changes. So Russell science is about geometry. If you want the math, then you have to look at it from a geometric point of view, because everything which is formed has to be preconceived into some form of a scaffolding. That's what the cubic wave field model is. When you have motion bounded within, say, 6 walls of a mirror, now you have a massively complicated geometric form because you have repetition at orthogonal angles. It gets a bit complicated, but it's very well put down by Russell in Universal One on the chapter Universal Mathematics. And also a member of our Science and Research Committee, Hannah, she excels at the mathematics and the geometric formations of the cube wave field model. She's been working on the math because, just as you pointed out, there are people who will never accept it without the math behind it. And I would say that really a large aspect of the sciences has nothing really to do with mathematics, because how can you use math to describe your soul or your mind, even, for that matter?
Right.
So math is a language. Math is a language just like English is a language. There's no difference. It's just you even have to go through and learn all these letters to know what a statement really means. So I use mathematics. It's extremely useful because you can get proportionalities. It's a ratio. All mathematics is relationships. That's how I think of it. Now, your second question, how do you weigh a weightless planet? Well, it doesn't have any weight, so you don't weigh it. Weight is a relationship between a mass and a center of gravity. So relative to a center of gravity, a planet doesn't have any weight at all. It's in its potential zone. Uh, take any planet you like in relation to our sun in our solar system. Our sun produced every single planet. It gave it off at its equator, and now it moves outward. When it finds its potential zone that matches its potential. Everything in this universe moves to seek its own pressure potential. So that's why Mercury is a rock solid planet, but it's very, very close to the sun. And Earth is also terrestrial. It's a rock solid, but it has on its crust now liquid water, and it has that because of its potential pressure zone, let's say, relative to the sun and its own angle of inclination and the way it dips above and below the solar equator. So nothing moves in the universe except to find its own pressure potential. But once it does, it no longer has any weight. A rock on the surface of the planet doesn't really have any weight because now it's found an equalized pressure condition and it equalizes. It no longer has weight. Weight is really a measure of how out of balance you are. That's all it is.
Right. That's the most interesting, the last statement there. The weight is actually the measure of how out of balance you are. Most people, that's an apophatic approach. That's a deconstructing of what most people think. Well said and brilliant. So okay, so technically, just so I have it correct, you can't weigh a a weight. Well, you can't weigh. I said a floating planet, but the reason why you can't weigh a floating planet is because it's actually imbalance. The only way you would be able to detect um, the quote unquote weight of a planet is if it falls out of balance somehow, and that's impossible. The whole thing is spinning on its axis and potentially orbiting in uh, these brilliant harmonic patterns of a vortex cone. So it's always balanced. Is that fair to say?
Right. The only way the planet would have weight is if you somehow were able to remove it from its orbit and either bring it closer or farther away from the sun. Now it would have a measure, an elastic measure of imbalance, and you would be able to measure that if you had, sufficient instruments. But it works the same way for your own body because your own body is a compressed mass. And so if you were to dig a ditch, you would find that you weigh more in a ditch than if you climbed up to the top of a mountain because you've changed your relationship between your own mass and the center of gravity in the earth. Your own body is always an extension of the planet, and a planet is the extension of a sun. This is how it works. Bodies come together, male, female, and they produce more male and female bodies.
Yep. Okay. So you mentioned the center of gravity. There's quite a bit of talk out there as to what is gravity, and since we know that the universe is actually not particulates, it's not moving around in little balls called atoms, but it's moving around in waves. Then can you talk about what modern science calls gravity, and can you define it in terms of what Russell would say, and should we even use that word, or should we just redefine it, or should we come up with an entirely new word for that principle in the universe?
I think we should use Russell's definition of gravity because he had a much deeper understanding of how gravity relates to everything. Gravity, in many ways, is really the only force in the universe. But in some instances, he would say that electricity is the only force in the universe because electricity is really a strain or a tension from separating from unity. In other words, when you take an elastic rubber band, it's inert, it's in a state of equilibrium, but when you stretch it, you give it a dynamic tension. And the reaction, the elastic reaction to go back to equilibrium is part and parcel now. So really, you only need one force in the universe to create seemingly two different forces, one away from equilibrium and one toward equilibrium. In either case, that's exactly what gravity is, except it works now in three dimensions, you see. So they have a very modern science's understanding of gravity has everything to do with Newton and Newton's law of matter attracting other matter. But nothing, as I said before, moves to because of attraction or repulsion. It moves to find an equalized pressure or an equilibrium. Everything is trying to get back to equilibrium. So really, the only force is the one which divides any equilibrium into two polarized extensions, and that is what gravity is. For instance, the gravity center of the Earth, for example, they say the Earth is a magnet. Well, if the Earth was a magnet and we have a North Pole up here in the northern hemisphere and a South Pole down in the southern hemisphere, then the middle of the Earth would be completely inert. You can't make anything stick to the middle of a bar magnet.
Uh-huh.
So you wouldn't be able to stand on the Earth if it were inert at the center. So really, the Earth, just like every other sphere which is created, is done so by conical magnets in pairs. Everything works in pairs, male and female. They work together and they construct and deconstruct this entire universe of optical illusion.
Okay, and so you mentioned optical illusion, and that was another one of my questions. Well, basically, there was in your last talk that I was listening to at the USP, you were describing the universe in terms of optics instead of gravity, so to speak, or instead of I guess what I'm getting at is like people will say, well, gravity bends light, but technically it's not gravity that's bending light, right? It's something different. It's an optical based universe. So can you talk about that?
Well, you get lenses. Lenses bend light, and lenses are always gravity centered. In other words, you have basically rings. Rings are where spheres are sections of spheres, and lenses are where spheres intersect one another. And now when they intersect, you get that sort of two-dimensionally. You would call it a vesica Pisces, where you have that sort of biconvex lens formation. That's actually what divides and multiplies the potential of gravity. So it's always projected back to the center. So every mass has a center of gravity because every mass is made from the multiple collisions of multiple waves at various harmonics, and these create hundreds, if not millions, of different types of lenses within every wave field. But it's always under the control of gravity. Gravity, in many ways, you can think of as being mind. Mind is sort of the ultimate organizer of all of this stuff, and that is as much has to do with gravity as in a physical sense as it does with your own mind, which motivates you and centers your own physical body.
Okay, so are you familiar with the Ferrocell?
Absolutely, I have one.
Okay, cool. So this is kind of new to me, but I've been watching some of the videos out there about the Ferrocell, and you can clearly see uh, the what I call electric lines. I think I mean maybe that's the incorrect word, but you can see these lines what you're describing. Coming off in perfect geometric patterns due to an actual magnet. Usually, you see these lines when someone puts a magnet under the cell. Different types of magnets, clearly showing without a doubt what's going on in nature. So so those lines you're talking about, those would not be lines of gravity, right? The thing sustaining the whole image would be what you're considering gravity, or is that correct?
So I think you're referring to magnetic lines of force,
Yeah.
the curved lines around a bar magnet, for example.
Yes.
You can see these. You can see these with either iron filings or the ferrocell is really good. The ferrocell actually is really proving that this is optics because it's polarizing LEDs, isn't it? You have LEDs arranged in a circle, and then you have a type of a cell which bends in the presence of a magnet, which means that the condition of the magnet is really a polarized one. You've separated one condition and you've made strains and tensions. When you make strains and tensions, now you make spherical intersections, which give you lenses, which bend. They bend radii. The magnetic lines of force, as described by modern science, are really nothing other than radii of spheres, because nothing in nature is created other than spheres and cubes. That's all there is. They're just in various pressure conditions relative to the amount of polarization that's held within the magnet. When you start using these magnets in pairs, you start getting the conditions that we would conventionally call gravity. When two magnets are used in certain configurations, you can produce the effect of everything moving toward one center, which is what we experience here on this spherical planet of ours.
Okay, but so those magnets, though, what you said earlier, would have to be conical shaped. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, every Russell points out that every magnet in nature is actually conical in that you have a wide base out in space and a more compressed condition at the what he called the anode or the apex of the cone. And these two work together to produce that radial direction inward from every spherical angle. It's a bit
Okay.
hard to describe with words.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so if I'm getting this correctly, when someone asks me, and you already answered this question, but when someone asks me, well, where's the math? Where's the math? Where's the math? I typically go, well, it's vortex math. Look at, number nine, the sacred number nine, the nine number of completion, encoding the spiral, and or really in three dimensions, a vortex cone. So, would it be safe to say that in general terms, that's true, that vortex mathematics is an accurate description of what you're talking about?
Well, I don't endorse any one particular, set of mathematics, but
Okay.
really what it comes down to is that everything which is extended in motion and time eventually is voided back into zero. So the universe never actually exceeds zero. In other words, you could describe the universe with mathematics till you're blue in the face, but you always will have to sum it back to zero. So uh,
Brilliant.
so you can use math to describe motion, but to get the full story, to really realize that the motion couldn't have existed without coming out of a zero condition, and that it must return to that zero condition, just as everything which is born must die to be reborn yet again. What we're dealing with is continual cycles that go infinitely long, because infinity is kind of like zero, isn't it?
Yep. Yes, it is. So, yeah, so time cannot exist without eternity, and that sort of thing. Like,
Time cannot exist without eternity. Well, time cannot exist. Time cannot exist without motion. Motion is gives you repetitive sequences, and when you ignore, as I said before, you ignore half of that cycle, then you get continuity, because now you see things grow preponderantly for one half of a cycle and decay in the second half of the cycle. And then, but we don't necessarily see that, for example, human lives. It's not readily apparent that they repeat themselves, but they do repeat themselves. It's just that their time intervals are now on a much a larger scale, and we can't really comprehend them. Just like we can't really comprehend how long the sun's life cycle is. It's so extremely long compared to our short lifespans that it's a bit inconceivable. And this is what's happening in nature all the time. There's time cycles within time cycles.
okay, okay, it's a lot. It's a lot to think about. Um, Thank you for that question. I mean, for that answer. Okay, let me see if I can sort of shift gears. And I don't know. I actually don't know how to articulate this question, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about color and incandescence, following different patterns of density. I heard you mention that uh, earlier, and it makes me think of the work of Goethe, who was sort of had a whole different approach to light moving through a prism than Isaac Newton did. And the more I study Goethe, I tend to agree with his approach. And I don't know if you've looked into Goethe, but I'll simply say this: that there's the basic experiment where he's shining light onto a cone, and he's using different colors of light, white light and then green light and then blue light and red light. And we see when, for example, when a green light is shined on a cone, the shadow the cone makes, when there's green light from both sides, the shadow that the cone makes is this purple color. So you're looking at a shadow that would normally be dark or gray with white light, or with a combination of white light and green light. But when you just do green light, the shadow is now clearly like purple. And modern science, everyone can actually see this with their real eyes. They can perceive this. You could stand in the room and you could see clearly this is purple. But modern science has no instrumentation that, as far as I know, that measures that light wavelength of purple. And so they basically just ignore it or say that it's not happening and that it doesn't exist. So I know you mentioned incandescence and the way color, follows patterns of density. Can you? I don't know if you don't have to relate that to Goethe, but that's just what I did. Can you just talk about that?
Sure. I am familiar with Goethe and his experiments, and in a lot of ways, it's really good for transitioning into thinking about polarized light, because what it really means is the significance of it is that polarization means that there's two things going on rather than one, and that's if any scientist can make that jump to think about that there's actually two things happening rather than just one thing to create what you're experiencing, then a lot of this starts to make sense, and a lot of it you'll be able to answer on your own. But incandescence is sort of, I think of it like a short circuit. It's what happens when two waves collide with one another and they produce maximum heat and maximum density. So the sun kind of looks yellow to us, but it's really incandescence, which is sort of almost white or colorless. It is the simulation. The important thing to realize is it's the simulation of the magnetic white light of mind in motion. Just as stability is an illusion of motion. When you look at a solid rock, you know that it appears solid to your senses, but to someone who knows the motion which is creating that rock, realizes that there's a massive amount of potential in that rock, and it's really frozen light, frozen in one condition. But it is as much incandescent as anything else, which is that dense. So the color spectrum is what happens when you divide the invisible magnetic light of mind into polarized light, which is now compressed into a condition of higher density. And then it radiates because the gravitation is equal to the radiation. And we see it when it's heavily gravitated, it's heavily radiated. And we see this with our eyes, and we feel it even with our bodies. We feel the sensation of heat, right? When you put your hand near a light bulb, an incandescent light bulb, you can feel the radiating field of heat that comes off of it in all spherical directions. And this is what light is doing. It's dividing itself to multiply. It divides first and then multiplies into incandescence. And every state of motion is really a various state of, you could say, color or just polarized light.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Brilliant. Okay, so that leads me to the question, and uh, in order for us to see or experience light, there there has to be the contrast of darkness. So, I mean, it's kind of a vague question, but like, what is darkness? Is darkness just light that it's unperceptible to us, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's they state the Russell state in the home study course that darkness is another way God gave man to divide his universe. In other words, when your senses look into space, we register it as nothing. But you know that, for example, when you walk around, you're actually in a fluid. You're in a fluid called the atmosphere,
Hmm.
but it's completely invisible because it's beyond your range of being able to sense its vibratory motion. It's too tenuous, if I can use that word, meaning it's diffuse. It's no longer compressed into a solid condition, which your electrical senses can determine as something hard. It's when it becomes expanded and it occupies a larger volume. Now you register it as basically nothing or negative space in that sense. But it's not nothing. It's actually just full of elements that are way beyond our sense of detection. We cannot detect when the wavelength is that long. It's well beyond our ability to see or even feel it, but it has to be there. It's one way for us to exist and experience the things that we do.
Okay, okay, and so I would assume that in the all the true wisdom traditions, this is a more philosophical question, but in all the true wisdom traditions that have not been corrupted and prophetized by a hierarchy of priesthoods, I think it's fair to say that all those traditions are really trying to teach mankind how to unlock, you know, his access and ability to perceive the infinite wave or infinity. So if that's true, someone like Russell is what we would call a true illuminary. Would you say that he and other great minds and great beings have seen or been able to perceive and see deeper into that wave, like beyond, obviously it's beyond like the average man's consciousness to be able to come up with this kind of stuff. I know he's not the first, but would you say that man has the potential, infinite potential, like we can potentially perceive boundlessness?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest points of their work is to realize that you're capable of far more than you think you are, and that your limitations are set by yourself. And they're there. Everything is good. Everything is good in the sense that it all leads to, let's say, self-development. So limitations are good because it means it gives you something to overcome. And when we talk about the limitation of our senses, Walter was somebody who in many ways transcended that limitation. He was able to see the whole 360 degrees of polarized light rather than the tiny little sliver that our eyes are privy to on a day-to-day basis. And he even discusses during his 39-day illumination being able to see people's auras through a solid door that would approach to knock on his door. And he could see this for basically his entire field of vision. And what's fun that it was actually quite annoying to him because he was trying very desperately to write the message of the Divine Iliad, and this being able to see so many forms of color that we don't even have names for because we haven't charted their wavelengths or their frequencies on the color spectrum. It was actually kind of annoying for him. He was trying to get work done and being able to, but when you're in that state, that condition, the same one he was in, you fully realize all of the uh, limitations that your senses are subjected to. And so he's as he said, he was taken behind the scenes of God's universe and was taught that same thing, the creation mechanics, and was since he was an artist, when he regained his sensation, he was able to very accurately put this down into art form, into paintings. And the best way to I can say it is I can recommend that you get maybe just an idea of what his experience was is to look at the painting that he called The Wave. He very he painted basically a three-dimensional wave moving structure on a two-dimensional canvas.
Hmm.
And by studying this and some of his charts, you can really start to begin to realize the significance of the experience he had, because he was basically no longer subjected to any kind of limitation of senses.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you hear about that, or you can read about that, in from many different traditions, many different perspectives. But Russell's ability to put it down and to articulate it is amazing, and as well as his ability to balance the metaphysical and or philosophical language with the scientific language, with the language of the earth here, in the present form. It's brilliant.
Right. And they would often, one of their writings that is really something that sticks out was one of my favorite quotes. They said, our work is metascientific as opposed to metaphysical. The difference is great. And meaning they had gotten offers from so many people, from the Edward Casey Foundation to psychics to channelers, and they refused all of them. They did not want to carry that kind of work at the university. They would point you to other works as opposed to those kind of new age things. They would point to more metascientific teachings like the incredible study done by Dr. Richard Murray Spock in the book called Cosmic Consciousness, where he studied the cases of 40-some people who exhibited all the traits of classical divine illumination and helped to quantify the experience as one that is measurable. It's the least known, the least talked about of all human experiences, but no less, all these great luminaries brought new knowledge to the entire human race through those experiences. I mean, they started religions, for Christ's sake, but it's always the followers who screw that up. It's not the original people who founded or started or brought you the new knowledge. It's the followers and what they do with it. I mean, even here at the University of Science and Philosophy, there's been disputes between past administrations and student bodies and things like that. But again, I think we get sometimes high and mighty in our efforts to approach knowledge and to be the holders of the keys of it and decide how it should be disseminated, when knowledge is like art. I mean, it's something to be left alone and pay. That's how you pay the most respect to it. Because the minute you change something, for instance, the Mona Lisa, what if a commission of people in, 5 years from now get together and decide that they're going to remove certain paint strokes from the Mona Lisa? Which ones would you remove? Mm-hmm. Which ones would you change to suit the cultural norms of the day or the morality of the people? Moral meaning ways of the people, the mores. And that's what's dangerous about messing with anybody's writings, anybody's art, because if you truly respect knowledge, you'll leave it alone and let every human come to it on their own, because if the knowledge doesn't change, then it's timeless. It has its quality that emerged from stillness, gave it its impetus to attract people to it, but it retains its timeless quality by respecting it for what it is. That's why great art, like the David statue by Michelangelo, has retained such importance. If some sculptor would have come along 200 years later and gone, oh, we can't show the private parts or the naked body, let's carve up the statue to make it look like he has clothes on, it would be an absolute disaster. You have to just basically look at knowledge in the naked eye for what it is, leave it alone, respect it. And that's one of our missions here at the USP, is just to leave the work alone, but help it to secure a foundation so that it lasts well into the future. It's one of the goals of our committees are to just, find a way to raise money to where we can get a new museum to put the artwork back out on display, because the art is the living philosophy embodied. I mean, it's the proof that the philosophy holds water, because unlike Einstein, who said, I have this philosophy called math, but yet had no bodies to demonstrate its existence beyond a few numerical characters. With the Russell Science and Philosophy, you can see 36 tons of artwork and sculpture as living proof that this philosophy has, credence.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, to be able to have that, to be in the position that you're in, and to understand and respect the knowledge, and instead of try to change it, to hold it as it is, leave it alone, is an extremely high level of conscientiousness. And I agree with you. I'm coming to this knowledge.
And yeah, just like,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Say, just like if you should write a song, Ryan, and 100 years from now, some guy comes along and goes, well, I don't like that guitar lead, I'm going to change the whole thing. Then you've just completely ruined the original intent of that author, creator, musician, poet, philosopher, whatever. So that's why it's important, to garner a respect for the work, especially giants like Russell. I mean, he's, as Michael Tessarian said in a recent interview, his name should be shouted from the mountaintops. He's one of these giants of humanity whose work has added a great deal, a great gift, a great treasure to the rest of the human race. And, to think about the inhalation process of nature, which is really the missing piece here in science. I mean, they've given us a pretty full-on explanation of exhalation in the universe, but absolutely no even hint of an inhalation process to matter. And they can describe the effects of the tornado as it blows down homes, but they can't describe how it's formed. They completely miss the inhalation process. And with gifts like this that come to the human race, often the illuminate will make known what was previously unknown. And that's really the beauty of the science, I think, which is a living embodiment of the philosophy. And the philosophy is the living embodiment of the science. You can't have one without the other, just like the root and then the tree.
I'm a big fan of Michael Tessarian. I've been following his work for a long time, and I saw that interview with you and David Whitehead. I loved it. Really, really good work. So yeah, shout out to him. But yes, I mean, you're absolutely correct, and I don't know much more to say other than yes, yes. About the home study course. I mean, I think how can people get a hold of this information? I mean, anybody can go buy a book on Amazon and go buy the works of Walter Russell. I myself have gone through The Secret of Light about 1.5 times, and it just enthralls me. It's a super dense, study. It puts me into a very meditative, contemplative state. That's how I know that I'm actually growing and learning. But for others out there that are listening to this podcast and listening to this, what's the home study course about, and also what's the best way for people to get more in contact with the works of Walter Russell?
Well, certainly the website, philosophy.org, and click on the store, and you can find links to pretty much all kinds of things: books, booklets, home study course. We offer the 3rd edition as a Kindle ebook. There are many ebooks for people who prefer that platform. And I must say, I know I'm well aware of all the free PDFs floating around there, but the impetus to purchase the physical copies, obviously, there's so much writing on the fact that the university is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and its very existence and all the sales of books, donations help to fulfill the goals of finding a new place for the artwork. We are doing science and research, which is taking a dramatic acceleration with Darren being part of this. I mean, he's basically sacrificed his income to pursue this, and he's doing some amazing things, which we'll put into video form and present to the world in time very shortly. And as far as the home study course, the benefits of the home study course, what is it? It's a course in cosmic consciousness, more or less. It teaches fundamentally universal law, which is the law of balance, It teaches the living philosophy, which is the approach to being a great creator or unfolding your genius, which all of us possess. And then it teaches natural science, which is the mechanics behind nature, the cubic wave field model. And you can also see basically a even more intense conglomeration of all those lessons put into the book Atomic Suicide, which is the final distillation of the science. It's one of the most beautifully written books they ever did. There's major changes between, well, some significant changes, I'll say that, between that and the Universal One. The Universal One is considered his magnum opus by a lot of people, though it was his first attempt at giving you his scientific principles and concepts, where Atomic Suicide is really 40 years of maturation and much retrospection on his own definitions of words like gravity, things like that. For instance, one of the chapters in Atomic Suicide, page 106, I think it's chapter 3, is called "We Define God," and that to me is, every scientist should read that before he, relegates the idea of God to some dustbin of history somewhere. And we really are operating in terms of terms itself on a Windows 93 kind of operating system. We really need to upgrade our definition of the entire idea of divinity, of spirit, and how much it plays a part in the role of man. Again, being materialistically minded, we've reduced mind itself to a function of the brain, where clearly there's a million near-death experiences and probably several thousand illumination experiences that almost conclusively prove that mind is not an effect, but rather the cause. That rather it's more of an idea of the creator itself, as opposed to a condition of matter or some emergent faculty from an entropic Big Bang of some sort. So yeah, it's basically the ideas that the Russells offer and what they teach in the home study course and many of the books at philosophy.org are, again, meta-scientific principles as opposed to metaphysical. And it's basically is a blueprint for unfolding more of a cosmically minded awareness that you can use in your daily life to fulfill your purpose and to help to uplift humanity as a whole.
Perfect. Wow. Yeah, in my some of the things you said there just sort of ring true. My latest interview is with a Native American Sundance leader, Lee Plennywolf from Pine Ridge, and I was really trying to probe him for all this spiritual experience, this what we maybe would call paranormal or beyond the senses experience, when I was talking to him, because I know him pretty well. We're close. I practiced ceremony with him, and he just kept drawing me away from it. And he's like, this interview is not about my personal, illuminations, my personal experiences. He's like, all I really want to teach are the 7 Lakota life values. And I won't go through all of those, but the reason why I'm saying this is that, the first Lakota life value is creator first. It's like you have to acknowledge that there's something going on here that's, one, mysterious, and one, beyond you, right? So he's like,
absolutely,
the very first thing is, walk your life and acknowledge there's a creator. There's a great creator first. And I think you've said this many times in your past interviews, is that science's biggest misnomer is their original jumping off point. Their approach to reality is just wrong, because they're ignoring quite literally the largest thing in the universe, which is God, or the creator, or spirit.
And that's well said. I mean, every motif, you can see this motif running throughout the Native American traditions. You can go to the Vikings, and you can go to the Visigoths, you can go to the Romans, the Greeks, the Sumerians, tribal elders in Africa, the shaman of the world, and they all basically say the same thing. They acknowledge the divine. You know, that's a common motif that runs through all of India, all of even Chinese, you know, ancient modalities. Basically, what you see with science is again a removal of the creator, a denial of the spirit. And so matter must now take the place of spirit to define material. And this is how they've come up with the ludicrous idea that there's this God particle, when the actual God particle is all around us. It's the most plentiful substance in the universe. It's called carbon. That is, in Russell science, the perfect balance between sphere and cube. Whereas all elements, which are basically, for one, there's one element, it's carbon. All is either trying to become carbon or is carbon unbecoming. But carbon is the balance of the wave of creation, especially in Russell science. And so it has the most bonding, the most chemical bonds, 10 million and counting that we know of. It's the most plentiful element in the world and the universe as far as we know. It's also the hardest substance with the highest melting point. The diamond is its crystal, which symbolizes eternal union for marriage ceremonies. It's no accident that's why they use the diamond to express love, which is the ultimate, you know, expression of creation and creator itself. And it's something we could look at hard and realize that there's a reason for this. And so all elements before and beyond carbon are distorted cubes, which, you know, are why they're transient in their qualities, more or less. But nonetheless, in terms of the spiritual aspects and why science uses matter to try to define matter, which, again, a particle, you can't even, what a particle of what? What is it a part of? How can a particle be used to describe another particle?
Right.
Again, it's like saying the left side of the seesaw is responsible for the right side's motion, but yet any numbskull can look at the center of the seesaw and see that fulcrum there that doesn't move. You know, and that's one thing science can't see, so yet they deny it exists. It's not just I can't see it or I don't know it's there. It's that, no, that doesn't exist. It must be something in the seesaw, the plank of wood itself. Let's look at this particle of the wood and try to use that to describe the motion of the wood. Well, that kind of approach is failing. I mean, it leaves you with all these disproportionate theories that they're trying to marry together. You have, you know, 100 different explanations, from string theory to the 500th Planck, all the way down to quantum this and quantum that, and somewhere they're trying to marry all these disproportionate theories together to create one big grand unified theory. Well, less is more, you know. The simplest explanation is always the truest. And I have not encountered a model yet that's simpler than the cubic wave field model and more explanatory in the effects of motion. Because I myself know that even at the center of myself, when I calm myself from an emotional, you know, back and forth, I can think more clearly. I mean, you don't have clear thoughts in horizontal thinking. You're stuck on the seesaw. But when you become vertical, when you think vertically like the great geniuses do, you complete the cross and you can access the totality of your being to bring into existence new ways, new approaches, solutions, if you will. They don't call it a solution for nothing. I mean, you're bringing it down where it never existed into being. And so you're learning to manifest creative principles within your own life that, you know, how can you fix somebody else if you can't even fix yourself? That's, you know, again, the great self-work is what all this philosophy is here to do. The science is the act of acting out your concepts into physical form. There's a very real process to that. And I think it's what makes their work some of the greatest work out there. It's inspirational. I would advise everybody to you know, take your own time and start with one of the books, start with the booklet. I guarantee you'll find inspiration in it. And it's that's the real attractor. That's what brought me more and more into the work, is that it was just one constant inspiration after another. And I don't, you know, claim to have been all that greatly well read, but everything I have read, I've never encountered any kind of material before or since that leaves one so inspired, which just creates the will and the desire to absorb more. And it's been a magical journey.
Well said. Brilliant. Yeah, there's no doubt when I've read of Walter Russell, it truly inspires me. I mean, it's brilliant. It's obviously, I mean, I don't even, it's kind of beyond words, you know. You can just say all these great things. Wonderful, brilliant, uh, illuminating, all that. It's all there. I know I have a lot more study to do. Um, but I feel that inspiration as well, that spiral within, you know. Um,
Absolutely.
it's
And it's also cult proof. That's the beauty. It's like wearing a bulletproof vest in the new age of fakery. You're one determiner for whether something is a cult or not a cult. Is there's always in a cult an external thing to follow. In the entire Russell philosophy, they point the finger straight at you and say you're the only thing to follow, and you have to figure out what you are here to do. But here's a basic guide in the home study course of how Walter Russell was able to achieve 36 tons of sculpting, architecture. Well, architecture is an entirely different weight. You know, there's several buildings in New York that are still standing today, but painting, poetry, sculpting, his philosophy, his music are all, evidence of what he claims or what he teaches and what they teach together in this home study course. That's the embodiment of the philosophy standing before thee, which again, it's just it's really about you. It makes total sense when you understand that the lever or the volume knob of desire is yours to turn up or down. Mediocrity is happy with the volume being set on 1. That's fine. But a genius, they crank that volume knob up. They turn it up as high as they can. And that's what makes a man more prodigious in his creative abilities than others, is because they want to be creative. You know, there are no accidentally great people, once again, as the Russell said time and time again.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I would just say that there's moments right now around the world where there's this dystopia happening, where people are falling into falling into some sort of doom, because if you're watching television every day, it's a constant loop or drip of fragmented psychology and gloom and doom. And I gotta say, I don't own a television, but still I read a lot, and when I read Russell, man, I sink into that. I sink into that inspiration. So I know there's something there for me, and that's why I'm so happy to interview you guys and help spread the word. I think you guys are doing amazing work. Darren, you got the science down. I know you could answer any physicist out there with an articulate, well thought out and sound answer. And Matt, the same with you. Your philosophy is the same, centered and sound. And so, if there's anything else that any other topics or anything else you guys would like to add, feel free. The floor is yours. Otherwise, I'll probably start to wind it down, and then, I'd like to pick it up again someplace at some point in the future once I go through all this. And there's so many jumping off points here. We could do other shows, on much of this stuff.
Yeah, I would just say, maybe as a final thought, that cultivate a fascination with the mysterious. That when I think about it, how I got to where I am now, it was really only because I followed my interests. I followed my passions. And I think if I can create something, invent something that gives people more free time, then that means that they have more free time for self-development and self-introspection. And that's probably the greatest thing that we can do for each other, is just give everybody a sort of a clear path as to what is really important in your life. And you need the time and the energy to really be able to sit down and focus on that. And follow your passion. That's really the only thing to do. And nothing in your life will make sense really until you really get that. and then everything will make sense, and you won't be fighting things that don't serve you.
Anything else, Matt? Anything you'd like to add, or?
Well, just like to point people, they can visit philosophy.org. Our social media connections are down on the right-hand side of the page, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Google+. There's also a plus sign at the bottom right of the page. You click on that, you can enter your email address for newsletter and things like that. Go to the videos page. I definitely want to plug the math that Hannah Van Hook has done, who is on our science and research committee. This is empirical, and it's irrefutable and undeniable, and it's basically what a lot of people required of the USP before they could look further. But definitely check her presentation out. Go to philosophy.org, click on videos, click on the Homecoming Conference 2016, and you'll see her video there. It's absolutely stunning and visual mathematical proof of the cubic wave field model, which hasn't happened before last year. So it's wonderful that there's so much progression taking place. There's a whole lot of really cool things that are going to come out in the next couple of years, new discoveries, new scientific, verifiable, empirical proof of concept of the Russell concepts. So just stay tuned to that, and look forward to speaking with you again in the future, Ryan. Thanks for having us on.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for taking us down this journey. Just incredible work. I've nothing but gratitude for all the time and hard work you guys have put in.
Thank you very much. I appreciate what you're doing, helping spread this message to the world.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a truth seeker, just trying to find that center throughout my life. I look at multiple traditions. I've studied Taoism and Hinduism and a lot of Hermeticism, and I practiced ceremony for quite a few years with the Native American tradition, and I constantly see how they're syncretized. I constantly see and feel not the disconnect between all these traditions, but the connection. Just the same things in different cultural expressions, and that truth is such a brilliant thing that the world needs, because people are so caught up in whatever dogma that they've been presented as a child by their parents or by their family, or by our culture and society at large. Just finding that center. That's what I'm going for.
Find it and hold it.
Yes, indeed.
That's why they call it the great self-work. There's no public prayer tabernacle where you can go to learn about the self.
Yep.
It's a very solo journey, but nonetheless, it leads to the greatest discovery, which is the power that you've always wanted and desired. It rests within you. And that's why it's cult proof, because there's nobody between you and the creator. And if there was, that's when it becomes a cult. So
awesome. Hey, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. It's great to actually get to talk to you guys and be candid.
And you too, Ryan. It's great to know there's other minds out there who are working on the great work of the self.
That's right. All right. Well, peace and love, and I'll talk to you guys in the future.
You too, buddy.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.